everybody. Welcome to the podcast. It may interest you to know. My name is Toni Marcolini, and today I'm joined by somebody whose voice you will recognize, even if you don't recognize the name. So actress, narrator, writer, voiceover artist, CJ Critt is with me today. Welcome, CJ.
Thanks.
So I first became acquainted with who you are, through the Janet Evanovich Stephanie Plum series.
Mm-hmm. She has a lot of
fans. She does, and that's the first time I listened to some of her books. Of course, I had read a couple of them, but I decided to see what all the fuss was about, with the audio, and you hooked me.
Oh, that's great.
You hooked me. Now, you did, I think, the first 7 in the series of developing.
No. Let me tell you what I did for Janet Evanovich, okay? Out of the first 10 books, I did 9 out of 10. One went, the rights went to someone else, I think book 7. And then she switched, as they say, horses in the middle of the race. She switched narrators. I also did 2 Alexa Barnaby books for her, The Metro Girl and Motor Mouth. Those are really fun. That series she didn't continue. And then I did about 11 books from her backlist, which were sort of Stephanie Plum light. I think she was perfecting her style with light romance and wacky comedy. And then she added the mystery element, which, of course, kind of catapulted her to success, because not too many could do mystery and funny and sexy, which she was very successful at and remains to this day. But yes, I did 9 out of 10. So there was one book that the book company I was working with, the audiobook company, Recorded Books, was not able to get the audio rights, I think, for book 7. But I got a lot of fan mail that year, people saying, "What happened? I was starting to listen. It wasn't you. I pulled the car over. I threw the cassette out the window." It was a long time ago. But, there was a fierce debate. But, the author wins. She gets to pick who she wants to work with. And that's what happened. So, yeah.
I mean, it was a weird experience, with the switch over. I feel like you had become the voice in my head for Stephanie Plum.
Yeah.
Right. So suddenly when there was a new voice, there was a little something to that, wow, this person, I don't know who this person is trying to, who's impersonating Stephanie. I mean, there is something to that. But tell me what it was like creating that character. How much input did you have, let's say, from the author or from your director, or is that all you?
Well, essentially, if you have the right material and you've been it's a matchmaking game. If the person who is either the casting director or the director or whoever is kind of choosing the talent, if they have the ear to kind of know, like, well, this person's specialty is serious medical drama, and this person can do anything, and this person is great with comedy, and this person has a really sexy voice for romance. So if they know the voice stable of actors that they'd like to work with, ideally they put the right talent with the right material. It doesn't always happen, but ideally they do. And usually when that happens, this is very different from theater, because the actor does all the preparation at home on his or her own, on their own time and their own dime. So the more you prepare, usually the easier and more fun it is in the studio, because it's like a performance. You don't worry so much, you don't stumble, you're not nervous, etc. But some people, and if you really know your authors well, I did backlist titles for Janet where I think I got them that morning and we were recording at lunchtime. So you knew clearly what it was going to be. It was so kind of by the numbers. But the Stephanie Plum ones, I think it was just kismet that they chose me. They knew that I did solo work and comedy at the audiobook office that did lots of titles back in the day in New York, and I think they're one of the few that still have an in-person studio. The business has moved primarily to at-home recording situations. Well, they figured out if the actor would provide the equipment, if the actor would direct him or herself, if the actor would do the post-production, that's a lot of money that the audio publishers can save. And then they just push the effort and the expense and the responsibility onto the actor. And actors were willing to step up. With the technology revolution, many people were better at running their home studio than they were acting. But they were able to merge those two skills, that they had an ease with technology. It didn't frighten them. It didn't intimidate them. And a love of spoken word and audio. And then sometimes, like, they'll come to me and I will give coaching. Like I teach a number of private students, and And sometimes, like, I'm getting ready to do a master class at a college in about a couple of months, because audio is a way that if you're a stage or a film actor, you might be able to also earn a living doing something cool and creative while you pursue things that, that you can't, like a commercial you can do in 30 seconds, an anime job, for instance, a video game you might be able to do in an afternoon. But an audiobook is a marathon of voice work. So you're going to be doing that book for, if it's a 10-hour listen, then you're probably in the studio anywhere from 20 to 35 hours to record it. And if you're recording yourself, meaning you're listening and you're proofing, that takes even longer. So back in the day when I did the Stephanie Plum novels, thankfully, that was when it was a collaborative deal. You're just the talent. You walk into the studio, you've read the book in advance, you've created the characters, or you think you have, they're in your head. And then you have a director there, and he or she directs you in your little booth. And when you're done with your session, you go drink your coffee and have your toast. You come back, your stomach quits rumbling, and you come back and you do some more. And then they would send it off to, dedicated proofreaders, and they'd have two, like, checks and balances. Two different people would proof the book, and they'd come back with the little mistakes and tweaks and boo-boos that you didn't even know you made. I got very good at just stopping myself. I knew when I made mistakes. About 2/3 of the time, we would clean it up as we recorded. And then later on, you would get a limited amount of retakes back. But I would talk to colleagues who would get 30, 50, a ton of retakes. That would make me nuts. So I would try to be really well prepared. But it's mostly intuitive, and then the preparation of reading it. And with some people, they actually will, because in the old days we would color. You would just take the book to the printer and you make a copy on page 1, 2, and then you'd have another piece of paper for page 3, 4. And so people would underline like dialogue, or they would color code it. Every time mom spoke, it was hot pink. Every time that, the neighbor spoke, it was orange. They would use different highlighters to help your eye see the character change that's coming, and then you could just switch. But many actors have a lot of characters living in their heads, a little bit nuts, and it's not that difficult to summon them up once you're accustomed to doing it. Very difficult for many people to thoroughly jump into a character and then leave it and go back to neutral, such as, like, "Get over here," his mother exclaimed. You don't want to go, "Get over here," his mother exclaimed. You don't want to say the narrative part of the emotional state of the character. So you have to learn to, kind of rub your tummy, pat your head, switch in, switch out. With Janet's stuff, it was always really fun because she had very fun, vivid characters that, to me, they'll say something. It wrote itself. It sort of knows what to play if you're a playful person. I don't think necessarily many working narrators today do the full voiced narration that we used to do. Every major character had its own voice. Now I think it's a lot more subtle and kind of sort of like subliminal. So I think the voices are not necessarily as distinctive, but there's different strokes for different folks. Some people like what they call an unvoiced narration, where you simply act the emotional quality of the lines. You don't really change your voice. When you're a little kid, you don't necessarily do a little kid's voice. You just play the lines. You play the character's dialogue. But back when we did, I did those things for Janet Evanovich. I did things for Patricia Cornwell. Now, she had a much more serious tone, but the main characters all had distinctive voices. And you have to be the voice of the author. So if the author is funny, there's a different tone in your voice than if the author is primarily serious. If someone has written a factual piece, like a journalist has written a great book, but they're not going to record it themselves, and you're reinterpreting words of nonfiction, that's a different tone too, because hopefully you're telling researched truth and not playing a part. So every approach to audio professional narration requires a little bit of preparation, ideally reading the book or the material a couple of times in advance. And depending on your skill level, you might make like a cast of characters, actually write down their names, put the first page they appear on, and then like a little TV guide, quick description, grumpy cop, hungry, Southerner, hates New York. You just can have the most quick descriptions because that will quickly give you an idea for a voice print. So long story short, lots of preparation. The actor does it him or herself. And when you get into the studio, you're very lucky if you have a director or somebody working with you as you perform. More and more now, the responsibility falls completely on the voice talent. And some voice talent who are super popular, they'll hire someone to do these things that used to just be part of the job. There'd be the director, there'd be myself, like the voice talent, there'd be someone else to do the proofreading, and someone else would handle any technical things that went amiss. But now pretty much people, like behind me is a small little Pro Tool setup and kind of a sound baffling. I don't have a specific dedicated room for perfect sound control. They're hard to come by. But you put up kind of like a miniature booth, and you drape it with audio foam that helps baffle sound. And yes, motorcycle goes by, got to do the takeover. Barking dog will not go back into the neighbors, got to do the takeover. But a lot of times, it's adequate to be competitive and put your work out there. I still prefer to go to a studio. Obviously, I would much rather have a little team and we all work together than have to do it all myself. But many people enjoy that solitude, and they're perfectionists. So you can do it as many times as you want if you want to. I prefer to do my rehearsal and try to nail it and then be done and then go to lunch.
Well, and the thing is with that particular series, right? There's a lot of interesting characters between like Lula and and Morelli and Ranger, and your voice is changing in and out, such that you would almost never know you were doing the voices.
Oh, that's
How
nice.
difficult is it to do? To switch in and out of voices like that in the same, and are you breaking in between, or are you literally reading right through and switching in and out?
I only break if I made a mistake or I had to sip, because I had to phlegm or needed a little sip of water. So ideally, like a theater performance, you're doing if you were doing a one-woman show and you had to play several characters in a scene, as actors and comedians do, you would just go from one to the next to one to the next. So that's what we do in there. And of course, if you haven't rehearsed or looked at the material, it is hard to do. But once you get used to doing it, it's sort of like a mother can always tell what the baby is saying, even what that toddler say? The mother knows. So that's kind of what it is for the narrator. After you've done it a while, you just know, where that voice needs to go. And you know that it helps to be very emotionally present, because you have to sort of be ready to slip into the skins of all the different characters you're playing. Someone might be upset. Another person might be sneaky and duplicitous. Another one might be a sexy siren. And this one might be just super calm and maybe a little controlling. And so you have to be thinking of the different emotional states and kind of markers that people that don't have in real life to help give the voices a distinctive flavor. And there's lots of subtle ways to do it, just, by going slower for some voices, by always being incredibly articulate and kind of uptight and spitting every word out like you're really just about to blow up. So you can do a lot of things, very small adjustments, and now that character has a real sound that's different or distinctive for that scene. So that's really, that to me, that's the fun of it, is living in the moment of that character, investing them with human emotions where possible to bring the words to life. So that's always my goal. That isn't everyone's goal. Some people just, I think of it as like being a good waiter. You're serving up the words. And if it's really good food, you don't go crab cakes, slam it at people. It's like crab cakes. So you want to make it enticing. You want to engage your listener. And there's different levels and ways to do that. And I always tell my students who come from theater, it's like, it's different in audio, because the listener is 9 inches away. That's the microphone. That's someone's ear. But, on stage, you need to project, and you need to. But for this, you have to the performance has to be just as deeply felt and realized, but the range of where you're sending it to is 9 inches away. So, it's different. It's all good acting helps, but it is different to act in the audio medium than say on stage.
Well, it's pretty amazing, right? Because the audiobooks to me have a very different feel. I've said this before on my podcast, that at any given moment, I'm reading one book like in ebook style, and I'm listening to another book. I always kind of have 2 books going at the same time, so that I'm always filling my spare minutes with reading of some kind. And the thing with listening to a book, for audiobooks, is you develop this odd relationship, with the characters that you don't really have when you're reading the book on paper. Because when I read a book on paper, I've given that character my own look, my own voice, whatever actor, actress, person I've attributed to being like that person. That's who I see, when I'm going through the book as I'm reading the words. But it's very different, when you're listening to an audiobook because that person has their own sound, right? And they've brought their own inflection. No doubt Stephanie Plum is funny,
Yes.
right? And you brought that to the character, right? Those early years, when you're first getting to know who is this person and why is she such a hot mess, right? And you make that funny, you make her lovable, and yet I think you somewhat set the tone in the audiobook, which was a little missing if you're just reading her.
Hmm.
Right. I mean, I think that inflection, those change, the even saying some of your lines with a sense of humor, you know what I mean? You get that, she's joking with us,
Yes.
right? She's helping to form this relationship with the reader as she's telling us her story.
Right. She's always
So
talks in the first person, like I'm Stephanie Plum, and she
yeah.
always has this kind of edge and that attitude, and she knows that she's a hot mess. And when I used to do those books, I would describe her as the kind of person who would find herself naked, handcuffed to a shower stall, dialing a cell phone with a toe, so a really hot guy could come over and let her out. So it's just like it's always humiliating and at the same time hilarious, and someone who can blow up a car in 30 seconds and fall in a pizza box and, the smush all. So it's great fun because we love to see ourselves, she's kind of every woman in some ways, she's has desires, has interests, and always is self-sabotaging and messing up and has a wacky family, which is very lovable. I mean, who doesn't love grandma? Lula. I mean, I loved Lula, and I was always really we used to do a lot of live shows for recorded books, and so they would send out some of us popular narrators and give us a little stipend and take us to dinner, and we do live because we're theater people, so we would do live readings from our audio repertoire, and of course you'd gesture and you'd act your rear off, and it was just so much fun. So I would always have fun doing like Grandma on the Road or Lula, and trying to find that her outrage. And there was some one great one, and of course I haven't really read or kept up with them in the last several years, but there was one where she is being chased by dogs when she's on an all meat diet. She's running around with like 10 pounds of sausages trying to eat them on the run with dogs on her heels. It's just very funny to me. So because it was funny to me, it was really fun to do. And there's only been a couple of other authors that I thought were also equally wacky and funny. They weren't nearly as popular, but they were, great fun to do. A woman named Joan Hess. Now her, crazy, she doesn't have the Jersey universe, but she has like Arkansas sort of hick universe. And if she wasn't from there, I'm sure the, Arkansas Civil Liberties Union would be on her because every other person has a hog in the front seat of their car or a still, or that like there's this Mrs. Jim Bob and Mayor Jim Bob and Jim Bob, the little Jim Bob. I mean, it's just really funny. There's always like an Elvis reenactment or something just nutty. So she's very fun, Joan Hess. And I only did about 4 or 5 books for her, and maybe she, didn't continue to get the publishing contracts. But when anyone writes this hilarious but sort of scathing, creates a universe of characters around a place, you can kind of know that it's at least partly true and partly real. Great fun. So she was another one. And years ago, it might have been the death knell, because someone said, well, Janet writes, it wasn't black and white, but something kind of made it a little vanilla, and CJ adds the Technicolor. I think it might have been after that they pulled the contract. So I think it's possible that some authors would rather that the obvious fireworks comes from the writing and not from the performance, because could that muddy the waters on who's really delivering the ha-ha? So it's interesting to think. Because like I say, I did 22 books for someone, you'd think they were pretty happy. However, there was a change of horses, and it also could have been, as one matures and you look at yourself and you think, oh, I'd like to have this polished, posh person from Britain be me. Rather than this versatile American actress who's just as happy doing a hick in the South as a New Yorker, So anyway, the good news is I love doing work with regional accents. It's always really fun for me. And it's a nice surprise, because people will hear kind of a pleasing, blah, blah, kind of non-regional voice, and they don't know that, you're dying to tell them all about when your Gonectazoin is a little bit stiff today. So it's just really fun to, have them like friends, just always ready to come to the table and be, kind of wacky voices at your disposal. And I've done a lot of guy voices. I've certainly channeled my dad's voice, Carol Dane. I can hear him, and it's not hard to do. So, I always tell actors, if you're playing a different gender, you don't have to sound like a guy, or men sometimes sound ridiculous trying to sound like women. But what you can do is channel female sensibilities or male sensibilities, male energy, female energy. And that will change the way you read the lines to sound a little more masculine, a little more feminine without sounding ridiculous, especially if you're not a good, if your voice is not versatile enough to sound and have different pitches and timbres that you're comfortable in, then you just always sound like you're pushing and trying too hard. But just think like, the football coach. Think like the comforting mother. If you can channel what those people are thinking as actors, then you can play, all genders and do all kinds of different things. And I'm sure Janet's probably gone into a lot more gender fluidity since, the books that I read for her. She did have one really outrageous character, Sally Sweet. But this is like 15, 20 years ago. So I'm sure she's gone with the times and changed things up a bit. And you may be more aware of that than me.
Yeah, the characters are, they've evolved a little bit. You certainly have some different characters, but she stayed true to the core principle. Stephanie's a hot mess, and Ranger and Joe are hopelessly in love with her, and and Lula's still her best sidekick.
Okay.
And Grandma's still looking for action everywhere she can find it.
Grandma will never die. Good for Grandma.
Right. And Rex is still running, sleeping in a soup can.
Cute. Cute.
Yeah. So, it's a formula that I think works. And kind of keeps people coming back just to see what it's just almost to hang out with them.
Yeah.
Right. More than it is. Sometimes I read the reviews where they'll say, oh, there's not enough, evolution for the characters. I'm like, you go back to hang out with them for fun. It's like, what are you up to today? Right. That's more the people who are reading it, who just enjoy revisiting these characters that they've grown.
It's like a good sitcom that you'd like to just kind of live in that universe and know those people. And it's comforting that they don't change so much. That's actually, part of the reason for that. That familiarity is very satisfying to the fans.
Sure. Nobody wanted to see, Ray Barone and Everybody Loves Raymond, join the Marines. People wanted to see him as a writer coming back to his house. And that's just the world you got used to.
Right.
Do you have a favorite book ever that you narrated?
Well, that comes up often. I certainly enjoyed at the time a Larry McMurtry book called Leaving Cheyenne. And it was it comes from 3 different points of view of a love triangle, very tortured love triangle. And it was great writing on his part. It's not an easy book. There's a lot of discomforting, not pleasant sections in it because of the history of these people and the hardness of their lives. But it was kind of beautiful. And there were 2 male narrators and myself. And the character I read for was Molly, and it was many, many years ago. And I lived full time in New York, but dating a Texan, and I had a very light approach to the Texas accent, so as not to be insulting to Texans. But it was just a real, like a departure from my actual voice, but it was really kind of joyful to read that. So that was a favorite because also I didn't have to carry the whole book. There was like a little team of us. There was 3 of us, which was fun. But certainly, some of the early Stephanie Plum things, we would just have to stop the tape and laugh. We couldn't go on. We could, that was fun. I think there was something about a member somebody's dismembered weenus being sent to the dinner table in a FedEx box. I didn't think we were going to finish the session at all that day. That the woman who was my Kathy, oh gosh, I can't remember last name, but Kathy was from Staten Island, and she was a real New Yorker, and she found that stuff so funny, and she was like, nobody else gets to work with CJ on these are my job. So she was very protective about we were all going to do the sessions together because not everything struck her funny, but this stuff did. And so Kathy was tough, and she would write, to get there from Staten Island was this hellacious commute. I couldn't even imagine. I would probably do it now that I've driven long distances, but I would just think, there's a ferry, and then there's the end of the subway line, and then you're into the city. She was a very devoted worker, worked there forever. Uh, yeah, and that I think is the nature of audiobooks. People who love it are just dedicated. They are lifers. It's what they do. And there were some very nice people that when we would go to the studio in person that I really get to know and really enjoy. Which I miss that. It's a little lonesome doing it at home. So it's
Yeah.
a little different deal than it used to be. But
So
it's
you have a new project coming up, right? Buzzed?
yes, yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes, it's an over-the-top pop rock creature feature musical satire, and it's set in the late 50s, the Cold War, and rock and roll is coming, and the threat of the bomb, and worse, the bees have stopped mating, and our food chain's in peril, and so our heroes must step up. And it's about the love of a shy nerd and his lab partner, soulmate, Austin Zuckerman and Chloe Edgecombe, and will their creation to bring the bees back into the mating world, Viagra, save the bees from the brink of extinction, or will it unleash mayhem? And we have 16 original fun songs. It is wild and crazy humor. It's kind of a mad mashup of Bigfoot, boners, cannabis, and bees. So it's for the people who really just want to have a good time. It's all about, kind of a wild, funny escape where the heroes are very likable and the bad guys are like a weapons nut who wants to weaponize the mutant bees, and an angry lab director who's not getting his way. So all the entitled, bad people get very funny comeuppances, and our, heroes thrive and survive, and the bees are saved. And it's kind of traditional, old-fashioned musical, like kind of all's well, it ends well, but a lot of wacky things happen on that journey to get there. And it's very fast, 90 minutes, funny, fast-paced, just keeps moving. So I've written a lot of musicals and had little productions, and they're always a thrill to do. Most of the time they were more earnest or more serious. And I've kind of reached a point where I really think what audiences want would be to laugh, escape, guilty pleasure fun, not feel bad about just being, letting go. So it aspires to do that in a very clean and tight way. But, it's definitely entertainment rather than ripped from the headlines, or this is my artful swan song. This is my bucket list of fun. And that's what I'm hoping to be able to bring to people, because young people get it. My age gets it. If you live through the 50s and 60s, there's a lot of little Easter egg jokes in there that are really fun. But I'm finding that when we do present it, like in stage readings, young people get a huge kick out of it. They're like, who wrote this? Where did this come from? Why don't we know more about this? It's like, well, the hard part is getting a partner to produce it. But the show is ready to rock and roll and go. And as a matter of fact, I was pitching yesterday on Zoom to New York producers, and that was very fun. So a couple people were interested. Yes, send me the script. So actually, before I was, when you called me a little earlier than I thought, I was working on proofing my script. So yes, I'm always hustling something. It's always fun to talk about audiobooks because it's sort of the wellspring of that voice work that has sustained me. But I've always been a musical theater person and always been writing.
Well, do you have a first love? I mean, is writing your true first love, you'd say, or?
Say it's an equal, writing and performing kind of go hand in hand, and I certainly love them both. There is a joy in seeing other people do your work and do it well. And for a lot of actors, when they write, it's just so they can have their solo show, or they can write the thing where they get to play the lead. And I get that, you want to write for your own self-interest and things that interest you. And I certainly have written a lot of solo work because also you just get in front of a microphone and do it. You don't have to have as many people say yes. However, when you write a show, it's very collaborative. All these people have to agree to be in it. If you're not the director, you've got to find one. You've got to find someone who plays the piano well enough to make those songs come to life. So you really have to have a piece that reaches a lot of people, or be great at networking, or be like in a position like if you're in a theater department because you're a teacher, you have a built-in laboratory. So you can do readings with your students, and you can do a spring something or other. So those things make it a lot easier to launch new work, because if you're just trying to entice theater professionals on the strength of your resume, you can't even get them to read the script and listen to the music. That can take a really long time. So the gatekeepers are often just time, and it's not that people don't like it or are not interested in you. You just can't get to the front burner because of all the other things they are, feel responsible for and doing. So there's not that many organizations that specialize in doing new work. But when they're out there, I'm more than happy to pitch to them and send materials and jump through the hoops, because the online applications are harder than writing. Act 2 is easier to write than these online applications. So, that's another part of it. So much of everything is moved online. You have to be prepared to send digital versions. And I pretty much am, digital versions of the script, digital versions of the score, a link so you can listen to the songs, a video so you can look. Matter of fact, I have a video on my website. I'm cjcritt.com. And on the buzzed page, I have a really cute 2-minute professionally shot video that kind of introduces the show in a very fun and playful way. So a lot of information's out there. But of course, we all need a social media director to kind of put the word out to an audience. People that you already know are interested. It's the people you don't know that you need to bring it to their attention. So that's that's the challenge for me, is get it out to people who don't know.
Well, sure. Well, I would think that, you have a pretty big fan base. There's a number of authors that you read for, on the New York Times bestseller list. So anybody who's a reader knows who you are. Let's put it that way. So I think it's just probably a matter of circulating, information about your new show. Because you do have a relatively large fan base. I can go to anybody who's I hate to use the word, reader, but there is a reality to that, right? The people who are constantly reading book after book after book, have more their hand on, who's writing what, what authors are doing what, and who's reading what, who's doing the audiobooks. And, you start to get attached to the narrators, which is unique for me, because I can, years ago, this didn't exist, and that genre didn't exist, right? You only got everything through reading the book yourself. Originally you had to actually have the physical book, then we went on to ebooks, and now somebody else can thoroughly entertain you. Like I could be chopping vegetables and, somebody else is reading the book to me.
Right.
And entertaining me even more, because the voices and the jumping in and out of characters and the inflection, it makes it entertaining. So I think you've brought back a lot of people who don't ordinarily, read, but now, oh, well, I can do this. I can listen to somebody, just entertain me with it. I know somebody who does it every time they go to the gym. Like they keep, the earbuds are in and they're listening to a book. Or who will find, like Tom Hanks had done the Dutch House, who are like fans of an actor, and find out they're reading the book, and then we'll get that book just to hear that person read it.
Oh, sure.
So it's a definite genre in and of itself, but people who are, at the bookstore all the time, or, downloading their books all the time, definitely know who you are. Like I said, you've brought to life many a character, for famous authors who are on the bestseller list, as you were narrating their books.
Well, thank you. I think if the readers had their way, I would be working constantly, because the people that like it really do. But it's interesting how flavors change, and people who run the audiobook publishing world, how that has changed. And there seems to be more of a preference for what we would call the unvoiced narration. Just a very well-spoken, neutral voice that doesn't make a lot of mistakes. It reads it kind of the same. And to me, that's like boring. But I think that is the perfect channel for, many sensibilities from different authors, or that's what they seem to be looking for. Maybe it's less fireworks and colorful and just more straight ahead. Here's the words, ladies and gentlemen. Here's the facts. This is it.
Which I don't prefer, because for that I'd rather read it. Right, because in my head I'm going to put somebody entertaining into the visual, and how their voice would do it. I would just rather read it. If I'm going to the trouble of listening to an audiobook, I actually want the entertainment aspect of it.
Yeah. Well, I agree. I love reading suspense, because I think of our voice as a paintbrush, and you can paint the scene all kinds of different ways. You can add dread, you can add anticipation, you can add that hushed, I know something terrible is going to happen, and you don't change a word. That's the skill set. You do not paraphrase, you do not ad lib. You don't just add sighs and laughter, just, willy-nilly. You have to, it's got to be there on the page. It's how you lift it off the page with your vocal performance that adds another, hopefully it was good to begin with, and now you add this another level of life to it. And it's very exciting to be able to do that. And you do really kind of live in the moment. I mean, if you're doing a breathless chase scene, you feel like you had a workout by the time it's over. I mean, and I get very Italian. I'm always like my hands are, and I can't really act for very long unless I engage my upper body, because two things. One, you're just more alive, but also it's kind of like when your grandma said, sit up straight. If you start to collapse over and get too cozy and comfortable, your voice changes, and you usually get more fatigued, and the fatigue shows in your voice more. So you actually really do need to sit up, keep breathing, and keep, stay. For me anyway, because it's always a very active type of performance, I really have to be physically engaged. Now, some people are just, it's this voice like a machine, and they, maybe they're not in shape at all. I mean, they don't do anything physically, but they can always produce that voice, and that's no problem for them. But, so I say everyone's a little bit different. But for me, it's a very much of a, you're not just a stick reading. You're very much physically involved, even though you're not acting on a stage. And your listener is 9 inches away, that microphone, it's a little dance. So if you're doing a romantic scene, if it's one of the guys talking, you kind of get a little closer to the microphone and you drop your voice and you just think bedroom talk. But then, if you're shouting to people, you're going to move further away than the 9 inches and a little bit to one side, like, hey, you, because you can't do that, hey, you, right on the microphone. It'll blow people out. So you learn over time this little dance of your mouth, your voice, and the relationship between how many inches away can I do that? Really close, 9 inches, further. So, you don't know that until you've done a few books, or you've had a good director work with you for a little while. But one of the things I really enjoy doing now, because like I said, I'm not as busy as I'd like to be, because the readers don't get to pick. If the readers picked, it'd be different. From, my little mail and people reaching out to me. But I do enjoy working with younger talent and getting people who have always loved it but not done it, getting them into their first books, and then they just take off. I've had 3 or 4 students work a lot. I mean, they're always putting on social media, I just have a new thing released on Audible. I just finished another romance title. I did a self-help book for this author. And it's just really gratifying to see how they have entered the marketplace and found a way to not only do something they love artistically well, but be paid for it and kind of move up the little rungs of the audiobook career ladder. So that's quite gratifying. And it's a wonderful time, if anyone's listening, for artists of color. It didn't used to be. There were only a minor amount of opportunities, like people went to Yale or Harper, like that beautiful voice. But now the doors are open. If you speak well, and there's lots of beautiful voices in artists of color. So if you speak well, you like to read, you can read accurately, you're good with technology, you can put together a home studio for under $1,000, a good one for under $1,000. And I know people have done it for just several $100s. The software is a lot cheaper than it used to be. A decent microphone, you could spend a fortune. You could spend a couple $100 and get a really good one. There's a sound baffling techniques, your closet with lots of clothes, a couple of wardrobe racks behind you draped with duvets and comforters. There are cheap hacks to make your home studio more soundproof. And a lot of that stuff's on YouTube. You can figure it out there. But I coached a few people with the performance skills, and then I send them to a tech guy to help them build their little home studio on a budget, because he's a lovely guy that won a Grammy years ago. And he also is underutilized. And, he doesn't, during the pandemic, didn't have to leave his house. He could just FaceTime and Zoom and help people, and they'd send samples, and so there's a lot of things that the ambitious person willing to spend a little time, put their resources together, that can do to be part of this now. It is different from the old school. Like all these people that I've coached that are now working and making money in audiobooks, they didn't go to acting school. They didn't do, 4 years in New York. They didn't do, Hell Theater on the Lower East Side. They had regular jobs and families, but they always were listening, and they always had an aptitude for this and good voices. And then as mature, working adults, they decided, I believe in myself. I'm going to take this chance. And I think CJ can help me. So I helped a lot of people get started And, if they have no ability, I can't make, this like magic. But if they're good, then I can help them be better and then I'm a great cheerleader, give them lots of confidence to believe that they can go on and do the next thing. And then the tech stuff, I refer them to better people than me because I don't like to teach anything I'm not really semi-expert at. So I was like, I have limitations, but if I can do it, so can you. And here's someone you can, text or call to get more information from. So that's always very rewarding to help them, enter and, learn it because it's daunting when you don't know how and you haven't done it before.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can imagine getting into the field. It's not an easy task, right? I mean,
Right.
at that level in particular,
Yeah.
you're talking about, and I'm not minimizing it in any way, but I'm saying you're not talking about like self-publishers, I mean, you're talking
Right.
about books that are published by,
Right.
a lot of the bigger companies,
Mm-hmm.
and they are particular,
Yeah.
who they bring in. So yeah, I mean, the fact that you're able to have, an impact on a young generation coming up, and that you're willing to, you've kind of
Right.
reached back and are willing to help people. I'm always a big advocate of that, right, of helping the next generation,
Yeah.
learn their craft and help move them into the roles with some knowledge of their predecessors.
Sure. And
So.
when I was busy, I wouldn't have done that. I mean, someone might have said, "Oh, can we hire you to give a master class?" And I'm so sure, like a special presentation. But having been less busy, I'm thinking, well, I always would joke and say, when I'm 60, I'll teach because by then I should know something. So I always felt like, as I have matured, it was time to kind of like, put up or shut up. So what do you know? How can you help others? Can you distill what you've learned into something that you can communicate to other people and that they can take away with them? So that's been a great skill for me. And whenever I have a workshop, I always say, well, I learn and you learn. And it's kind of like therapy. I mean, we always laugh a lot and have a great time. And I'm very, as I say, very excited for their successes and their little victories. Um, and it's amazing for really young people, which I don't have so many students with because there's a very, very young people are great at technology, but they often have not learned the thing of really applying themselves. So if it isn't instant and easy, they don't stay with it. So that's interesting to me. Like I'll hear a great voice, I'll hear talent, but kind of it's a mental game too. So if you don't prepare mentally, if you're terribly anxious, if you are prone to kind of negativity or depression, it's going to be really tough to do anything in showbiz. You don't have to be Pollyanna positive, but you do have to have enough positivity and persistence to balance what will obviously be rejection, difficulties, expenses, no's, the gates that don't open. But the people that quietly persist, have talent and a good attitude, gee, there's all kinds of things they can do. So that's been gratifying to me. But they're usually not the kids. They're usually like they've gotten married or they've had a child or they've had a career, and now they believe in themselves, and that's an exciting person to work with because they're not immature. They know how to show up for a job they don't necessarily want to do. They know how to do things on time, and they're willing to put themselves into an area where they're out of their comfort zone and out of their instant knowledge and grow. And they don't expect it to happen like instantly, which is very, smart.
Well, uh, fair enough. Fair enough. So tell people, where can they get more information about you?
Well, I have a nice website, which I finally pungled up and asked someone to design and made it more professional. So it's cjcritt.com. There's like, kind of career highlights, personal philosophy, a fun page about the musical Buzzed, photos from performance days in the past, some audio reviews, probably some samples. So it's certainly a way for people to go, well, I am curious, there's, scroll around. There's lots to see. There's various demo reels and film samples. So there's some of it is interactive. And then there's a contact section for someone, like people will reach out and say, I would like to take a voiceover class, or when are you teaching next? Or I heard from you that way. I do podcasts, and I looked you up. I said, wow, Toni's had a ton of people on these podcasts. She's been really busy. So I'm impressed by, the people that you've reached out to.
I mean, with books and stuff, I have to be honest, I tend to pick the people I read and like.
Sure.
So
Why not?
right. So those are the authors that I usually am chasing.
Oh,
But the same, I had Scott Brick on, because I've read, I had a lot of audiobooks,
sure.
with him being the narrator, and I wanted to talk to him. And the same with you. You were my first introduction to Stephanie Plum, that's my guilty pleasure. I'm a
Wow.
literary fiction gal by, if you forced me to pick my favorite genre, I'd say literary fiction. But that humorous mystery fix is kind of my guilty pleasure.
Sure.
So, I mean, I've been introduced to Stephanie Plum through you, and was a fan of your work. I thought you did a great job with the character, and followed, even when the books were coming out, then I would wait for the audio as opposed to picking up the book because I knew I wanted to absorb it that way instead.
Right. Right.
So, I guess I wanted to then just say, hey, you did this, you created this,
Yeah.
the voice that I grew to love. And
And
so
many
a
people
lot of the
did.
people that,
They'd feel like, you were their companion. They would get over brain surgery with you, you reading them the books. They would, like you say, go to the gym every day. They would go on a horrific commute. And then when the commute was over, they'd still sit in the garage listening. So when you have helped transport people in that way, to something pleasurable or compelling, it's very, very gratifying. So it's so nice that, like, because I haven't been doing that character in quite a while. I mean, decade or more, that you remembered and were interested in is really swell. And your voice is so authentic. I mean, you could definitely be in Stephanie's universe. No sweat. That's right. Just open your mouth, dear. You're there. So yeah, I mean, that's why I never really. I typically, when I just do the job and I'm done. Like, a lot of people go back and listen to their work and analyze. That's painful for me. I don't do that. I practice, I prepare, I do it, I'm done. And I'm doing a bunch of anime dubbing it's very popular with the young kids. I know nothing about these shows. I know nothing about the characters I play. I'm an evil grandma. Okay, all right. I'm a witch. I'm a nice witch. Okay, so I just do whatever they say, and I'm done. But so typically I don't also go back and listen to the competition to other people unless it's like a dear friend or something. But the other day I saw something had been released, and it was another Janet title. I thought, I'll just listen for a second. I listened just for a few seconds. Thought, well, that doesn't sound like New Jersey or Stephanie at all. So I thought, I'm sure it's good, and and I know there's a huge audience for it. But I just thought, oh no. So yeah, I mean, that was like when years ago when people would say I stopped the car, I took the tape out of the cassette player and I threw it out the window, and I'm like, I know what you're talking about now.
yeah,
Now,
well, the transition, for me, the transition wasn't easy, right? I mean, I was a big fan of the series. I'm still a fan of the series.
yeah, well,
Uh,
you think, Grandma wears spandex and goes to viewings. I mean, like, for fun. I mean, she's going to be a real character. She's going to be like a female Danny DeVito. Means something. Some edge. Yeah, it's hard. Anyway.
yeah, there was an edge to the voice for Grandma from you,
Yeah,
and there
yeah.
was definitely the change was a sweetness. Um,
It's like sometimes they'll sell an exclusive, so like only HarperCollins can do it, or only Simon and Schuster. But sometimes the agent of the author will get, all this bidding war. So several people met our price, and there'll be several versions released. They've kind of quit doing that. I think that's too confusing for the listeners. But I know Lori Petty did a version, and there were some other
yeah,
people who did versions, and yeah, and
right.
Janet didn't care for those. I mean, I have a signed book from her where it says, "You are Stephanie." It's like, what happened? Midlife crisis, midlife crisis. That's what I'm saying. But at any rate, yeah, I know that is so wild, because to me the voice of Grandma is like, there's a man at the door. Why didn't somebody tell me? To me,
Exactly.
I
Exactly.
can't entertain a man in distress. It's like, that was always my favorite line of hers when we'd go do a live show, because there are always these librarians and people that came to the library, and I'd just be going to town being Grandma. It was very fun. It was very fun.
Yeah. So I mean, after that, like, I didn't. Sometimes I read them. Sometimes I buy an audiobook. Like, it wasn't the same, But those early, I can remember getting. I think it was that Lori Petty or something, getting it and starting to play it, and like, what is this? This is not. this is not the gang, right?
Yeah.
And then it's just like literally like not using it and then going in search of, well, no, where is CJ Critt's version? You know what I mean? When I first realized that other people were recording it, and then
Yeah.
I would only buy you.
Yeah.
And then one day I couldn't find you anymore. You know, there was a new narrator, which I'm not knocking. I mean, you know,
Sure. Sure.
she does a nice job with it, but
Right. It's
it
different.
wasn't the same to my ear. It's different. It's
Yeah.
definitely different.
Actually, I think Lori Petty would be great as Stephanie, but I don't know if she has the range to play the other characters. So I don't know what her version was like, but I feel like her plucky quality would have been good for Stephanie if she'd been in a full cast. If she had just been Stephanie and someone else was mom and someone else was, then it might have been different. But yeah, I
Yeah,
know
from what I recall, she read it very uh,
flat.
all the same. Yeah, like there wasn't really a vibe going between the characters too well. It just didn't. For me, it didn't ring true at all. Like I couldn't even
Right.
get through it.
Yeah. I think they probably thought, oh, she's a great choice for this character, but she's not really, she's a film actress, so she doesn't really do audiobooks. It's a very different animal. And you really have to surrender your ego. And I always say I have to be a servant to the material. I have to serve that author. And it can't be, the CJ Crit show. Because hopefully, if I do a good job, I really do sound like the author for Cornwell, which is a medical examiner, and then the author for, the crazy, wacky bounty hunter, and then the author's voice of this little sheriff in Arkansas. Because ideally, I'm going to make and especially back when we had a director who would say, "Oh no, you're losing that edge. You're getting too soft here," and that would be very helpful because you would try to approach each book as its own little unique play of words, and you might have to do a slightly different voice to be in that world of that author. So it is very mindful, ideally. And I think now there's more of like, popular narrators just have a flavor and they just do that flavor all the way through.
Yeah.
And maybe they change it up, when it's an emotional scene, but they don't necessarily do, as you became accustomed to and prefer, distinctive voices where you almost think, is that a different person? Or is that two people doing that? And
Yeah.
ideally, it's just the one, character actor playing many different voices. And it's, like in a chase scene and there's children and there's a bus driver. It can be, you can do sometimes 5 different voices on one page of dialogue. It could be pretty demanding, stuff like that. You might actually rehearse a couple times just by themselves and then do it. But ideally, once you're in the flow, a little coffee or tea to kind of get you going, you just switch quickly and just play those characters straight through as if you're doing a one man or one woman show without like some people at home they might read something and cut, read the next line, cut, but I would never do that. I would just keep going unless I made a mistake.
Cool. Well, thank you, CJ, for joining me. I really enjoyed having the opportunity to get to talk to you,
For your interest, that's very touching. I really appreciate it.
and I'll put the link up to her website for anybody who wants to check her out. I strongly encourage you to do it, or go back and listen to really anything she's narrated. You're in for a treat. I mean, she does a
Oh,
really good job. The characters jump off the page, and you can find a ton of different books out there that she narrated. So I encourage you, if you like audiobooks, if you haven't tried audiobooks, try one. She's a great place to break in. Um, again, you won't be disappointed. So thank you for your time very much.
thank
And
you.
I hope you come back as you're continuing to do new things and talk to me about it.
I so appreciate your interest, Toni, and you're making this platform available to us. So you have a wonderful rest of your season, and thanks again for including me.
Thank you.